The problem isn't a lack of willpower. It's that every promise is made by one version of you, and expected to be kept by another. And no one ever introduced those two people. Have you ever noticed there's a version of you that makes incredible promises? The one who, right before going to bed, decides that tomorrow will be different. You'll wake up early. You'll work out. You'll stop putting off that project. You'll finally get your finances in order. And that version of you believes it, with almost hilarious sincerity. The problem is, that version is never the one who has to keep the promise. The person who wakes up the next morning is someone else. Tired, rushed, with a phone lighting up beside the bed. And that version looks at last night's promise, the way you'd look at a contract signed by a complete stranger. And then the guilt comes. Again. You've probably called yourself weak, undisciplined, someone who can never stick with anything. But what if that was never the real problem? In this video, you'll discover why this happens. Before we continue, if you've been recognizing yourself in everything we've talked about so far, this is exactly the kind of thing we explore on this channel. The hidden reasons behind the things we do. If you want to keep understanding why you behave the way you do, make sure to subscribe. There's a lot more coming. Now here's what doesn't make sense. If this were just laziness, why do you keep trying? Someone who's truly lazy gives up quickly, and doesn't even care. But that's not you. You make a new list. Buy a new notebook. Download another productivity app. Write your goals on the wall. You care. And that alone destroys the easiest explanation. Because if you truly had no willpower, you wouldn't feel guilty. Guilt only exists because somewhere inside you, there's a version of you who genuinely wanted to keep that promise. So what's stopping that person? For years, the standard answer was simple. Willpower. If you can't keep a promise to yourself, it's because you don't have enough discipline. The solution, then, seems obvious. Try harder. Be tougher on yourself. Maybe even punish yourself a little when you fail. But there's one huge problem with that explanation. It's been tested over and over again, by millions of people. And in real life, it still doesn't work. If discipline were nothing more than raw effort, the world would be full of people still keeping their New Year's resolutions by February. It isn't. The truth is both more uncomfortable and more freeing. Maybe the problem was never your willpower. Maybe the problem is that you're trying to negotiate between two different people, and one of them never gets a say. Here's where everything changes. Every promise you make has two characters. Let's give them names. The first is your present self. This is the one making the promise. They're motivated, usually because they just watched something inspiring, felt embarrassed about something, or had a rare moment of clarity. And in that state, imagining the future is easy. They picture a tomorrow self with endless energy, no procrastination, ready to make everything work. The second is your tomorrow self. This is the one who actually has to keep the promise. And your tomorrow self has one problem. They were never part of the conversation. They wake up with different energy, different priorities, a different mood, and suddenly they're handed a task that somebody else decided for them. In other words, the person who makes the promise isn't the person who has to keep it. Neuroscience points to something very similar. Your brain treats your future self almost like another person, someone you barely know. That's why it's so easy to make promises to your future self, and so hard to keep them once you become that person. You're not fighting a lack of discipline. You're trying to force a stranger to honor an agreement they never signed. This happens all the time. Here are 3 quick examples. The gym. At night, you decide you're waking up at 6 in the morning to work out. In that moment, it feels easy. You can already picture yourself in your workout clothes, sweaty, proud of yourself. But when the alarm goes off, the person opening their eyes doesn't feel any of that motivation. All they feel is a warm pillow and a cold room. Last night's promise suddenly feels distant, almost like it belonged to someone else. Money. You decide you've had enough of impulse spending. You close your banking app and promise yourself you're finally going to save money. 2 weeks later, you're exhausted after a terrible day. A big sale pops up on your phone, and the person standing there, completely drained, looking for any quick hit of relief, isn't the same version of you who made that determined promise. Using your phone before bed. In the morning, with a clear mind, you decide you're done scrolling at night. You know it's ruining your sleep. But at 11 o'clock that night, bored, mentally exhausted, your nighttime self couldn't care less about the health arguments your morning self believed in so passionately. 3 different situations. 1 identical pattern. The person who makes the promise isn't the person who has to keep it. Think of it this way. Every promise you make to yourself is a contract. But that contract gets signed at night by a version of you overflowing with motivation, pen still in hand, and it's enforced the next morning by another version of you who wasn't even in the room when the deal was made. It's not fair to hold someone accountable for a contract they never helped negotiate. It's like a manager promising a client that an employee will finish an extra project without ever asking whether that employee has the time, the energy, or even the desire to do it. Sooner or later, they're going to push back. Maybe they won't even complain. They'll just stop showing up. A new way to see it. The real question was never, how can I have more willpower? The real question is, why don't these 2 versions of me ever talk before I make a promise? Instead of making huge promises at night and expecting your tomorrow self to simply obey, try negotiating with them first. Before you make the promise, ask yourself, will tomorrow's version of me, tired, busy, running on low energy, actually agree to this? Or does this promise only make sense to the version of me who's motivated right now? That one question changes everything. Instead of trying to force yourself through guilt, you begin making promises your future self, the tired, real version of you, can actually keep. It's not about becoming stronger. It's about stopping the habit of treating your tomorrow self like a stranger who's supposed to obey without question. You've probably spent years blaming yourself for not being disciplined enough, thinking that if you really wanted it, you'd make it happen. Thinking that other people simply have more willpower than you do. But the truth is simpler and kinder. You weren't failing because you lacked determination. You were trying to make 2 different people agree, without ever putting them in the same room. The answer isn't becoming someone else, stronger, tougher, harder on yourself. The answer is finally sitting down with the person you'll actually be tomorrow, and making promises that version of you can realistically keep. Because, in the end, the answer never required more discipline. It was right under your nose. If this video spoke to you, maybe it's time to rethink the promises you've been making to yourself. Not with more force, but with more honesty about who will actually have to keep them. Leave a comment below and tell me, what's the promise you keep breaking over and over again? I genuinely love to read your answers. And if you want to keep uncovering the hidden reasons behind the things we do every day, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. Because every week, we break down another pattern that was right under your nose.